ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the very first episode of Sports Minds with your new hosts, MJG and the Birdman. Birdman, how you doing today, brother?
Doing great, MJG. Always, man. I'm just excited. It's football season. Starting with our first three busts from 2022. Manny, who you got first?
Oh, my first bust. So I'm gonna start from my least of the three busts was Mr. Brian Robinson last year. And he had 112 points last year. I thought he was going to be a stud. I grabbed him in the ninth round. I was like, Brian Robinson is the next big thing for Washington because Antonio Gibson was, of course, being left out on a back burner. But he had 112 points last year for the whole season. And it's not like he didn't get the touches. He got 17.8 touches a game. I mean, it wasn't like he was a lack of volume. He only averaged 9.3, which for a guy touching the ball 17 times to get 9 points is very inefficient.
Absolutely.
He did average 71.4 touches a game, 71.4 yards a game. But if he's not getting any targets and he's not getting any touchdowns, I mean, it just ended up being a bad play for me. How about you, Birdman? What was your third worst bust?
Well, one thing I did just want to add to Brian Robinson is, he did get shot too. So, it was a little slow start for him. You got to give him some slack there.
You're right. I forgot about that shot in the leg, man.
Yeah. Shot in his leg or his ass or something.
Reminiscent of Sean Taylor, another Redskin that was shot. Unfortunately, he passed away, So,
yeah,
he definitely battled back and had a solid season for backup, but he wasn't anywhere near where he should have been.
Yeah, I mean, I had him on a couple teams as well, and that definitely affected my season. But my first bust, I know this is kind of obvious, and a lot of people will agree with me on this, but Jonathan Taylor, he obviously wasn't healthy when he came back from injury. So he played 11 games, but, I don't think he was ever back to full health. So, he had almost 200 attempts and he was still well under 1,000 yards. Didn't get too many receptions and, only 4 touchdowns to close out the season. It was, for the number one pick across the board, it was very, very difficult to have him on your roster and just watch him week after week hit really, really poor numbers. And, he averaged 13 points per game, and you can take that for an RB2 or a flex, but as your top dog, your number one pick overall, it's unbelievable, and that was tough. I only had him on one team, but that was tough, and I did not do well in that league.
Yeah, Ed, and you're right about that. I was looking at his numbers here, and he averaged 20 touches a game, touches per game. Like he had the volume there, and you're right, 13 points, and he had 1,000 yards. He was averaging 90 yards a game, so it wasn't like he wasn't producing the games he was there. He just wasn't getting those touchdowns, and it seemed like it was pretty much spread out. So, but you're right. If you're taking a guy top 5 overall, he needs to produce better than that. I definitely agree with that.
And, it's something as I said before, your number one pick, you want 20 plus points every game. You expect that with your number one pick. You expect that basically from everyone that's going in the first round.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So who do you have as your second bust of 2022?
All right. So for me, next bust I have over here is Mr. Javonte Williams. He's another guy drafted high, right? He ended up being ADP was the second round, right? So he was going about the middle of the second round. And I was super bullish on the guy. I mean, the year before he was behind Melvin Gordon, and I was like, all right, this is going to be the time when he finally breaks out, right? No more Melvin Gordon shadow. He's the main guy now. And unfortunately, last year he only had 42 points. Granted, he tore his ACL, right? I think week number 4 or 5. He only played last year. He played 4 games, right? So week 4 he tore his ACL. And in those touches, he averaged 12 touches per game, and 10.5 points per game, which wasn't, it's not disappointing if you're looking at RB3. But if a guy is going in the second, third round, he has to be an RB, 2, borderline 1. So for him to only get, 70 yards per game and go in the second round, like, he was wildly inefficient. And of course, didn't help tearing his ACL. So that was my second bust.
Yeah, and
What about you?
The thing is, injuries. I'm sorry, but if we're talking busts, yeah, we're going to include injuries, and that leads me to Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts only played in 10 games. That's my number 2 bust. He only played in 10 games. He was never really producing while he was healthy, though. So, he finished with 2 touchdowns and had 350 yards, averaged 7.5 points per game. You can find any tight end on the waiver wire that's going to give you that. So, for a guy that's supposed to be, he was coming into he did really well in 2021 for a rookie, really high expectations going into 2022, and fell far below. Even if he stayed healthy, he was far behind his pace in 2021. So, and in 2021, he only scored 1 touchdown. In 2022, he scored 2. And for a guy that had so much hype coming into the season, that's just 350 yards, 10 games, 2 TDs, 7.5 points. That's a bust.
Oh yeah, and I'm one of those guys that was actually anti Kyle Pitts last year, because his rookie year he did have about 800 yards. You're right, 1 touchdown. He's getting a lot of double teams, and even last year I saw Drake London coming in. I was like, I don't think that's going to take the heat off the guys, because it wasn't a good enough team for him to produce. And for his ADP, he was going in his rookie season, he was going around 3 or 4. Same thing last year, third or fourth round for a tight end that has all this potential. I mean, most people forget that, tight ends are just the most, inefficient position in football, besides kickers.
Right.
So it's like, why invest that high in a guy, skill set that's going to only get you 10 points a game is beyond me. I never get that.
And I only had him on one team, and I traded for him about mid-season because, the other guy in my league gave up on him. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to see what he can do. Maybe he's going to come in hungry. I was wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, now we get down to the top, the worst bust or bad call of last year that you had. And for me, I'll be honest, this is not a guy that was a bust at all. It was just a guy I completely missed on, and I will take full accountability for it. So last year, I was one of those guys that said, do not touch Christian Kirk. Like, stay the hell away from him. And I know you were the opposite. You were a guy bullish on him. But, man, that guy last year, I was like, man, he was never healthy in Arizona. He's going to come to Jacksonville. He's going to not be healthy again. He's a slot guy. Like, I didn't even think he was that great. Like, he has some great games in Arizona, but I was like, I don't buy into him. And, of course, he was super efficient last year. He only averaged 65 yards per game, but he did average 7.8 touches or targets per game for a receiver. And in those 7.8 targets, he had 14 points, which is super efficient, because he ended up scoring 241 for the season. So, and this guy was ADP was like 9th or 10th round. So that was my biggest blunder of last year. You have anything to say about that?
Yeah, and I completely understand why people were skeptical about him, because he had, I think the first 3 years in Arizona, I don't think he ever played a full season, but or maybe his last year he did. I can't remember, but I know last year he played every game, and he was efficient, and he was consistent enough where you would feel comfortable starting him. He might not get you 20 plus, but he's going to get you 10 or 15 without a doubt. And, I just thought he was on a much better offense, and being the wide receiver 1, I just figured there's no way around some steady production. And that turned out to be the case. So I did have him in a few leagues, and I'm going to be looking for him again this year for sure.
All right. And then
And
what's your top bust, man?
right, and you know this because this was in your league where I had Lamar Jackson, and I got lucky mid-season by picking up Justin Fields, but until I had him, that was a stressful situation. You're taking Lamar, you expect him to be running, you expect him, if he's not throwing the ball, he's going to make up for it with his legs. And you know, when you compare him to the other guys going around the same time, you know, those top 5 quarterbacks, he was well below them. He finished with
he was a third or fourth round ADP.
Yeah. And you know, you're taking a quarterback at that level, you're expecting them to have close to 4,000 yards. He had 2,242 pass yards, 764 rush yards, 17 touchdowns. He did average 20 fantasy points per game, but we know he had a couple monster games that kind of skewed that whole number. So, and he was also injured. You know, like I said, we keep bringing up injuries, but you know, he only played 12 games. When you're coming back from injury, you never fully trust them until you see it, and we didn't see it. So the entire season was a bust for Lamar. So who you got for your booms in 2022? Who came off the board and impressed you?
Oh man, I had some guys that and I want to talk about booms because this is something I was super bullish on. I'm super happy about because last year I was on the Breece Hall hype train. That's my number 3 boom. I was all about Breece Hall. You know, you traded him to me. I went across the board. After week 4, I went across the board to everybody that had Breece Hall sitting on their bench because Breece Hall did not get no burn in the first few games of the season. And everybody's like, where's this guy going? Michael Carter's the guy, right? Because I think Michael Carter had a couple big games. And I was like, you know what? Let me get Breece Hall. I still believe in him. It's buy low right now. And sure enough, as soon as I got him, like around week 5 or 6, man, that guy just started going off. And he ended up, in that short time, he only played a limited amount of games. Breece Hall ended up tearing his ACL. I want to say it was around week number 7 against the Broncos. I remember watching the game. He had like a 60-yard rush for a touchdown in the first drive of the game. And then I was like, oh, Breece Hall's about to give me a 30 or 40 bomber. And then all of a sudden, those cheap shot and Broncos hit this man low in his knees going into the sideline, and the rest was history, man. Yeah. He walked off, and he was killing it. He was averaging 14 touches a game, so he wasn't getting, like, ridiculous volume, but 97.2 yards per game, 16.4 points per game, and he had 115 points in just, like, 3 or 4 games of starting. It was amazing. I felt like I was when you looked at my team, I was so stacked. I had him. I had I had a couple other guys that I'm going to mention here in a little bit, but I had some work. I had 4 running backs that were all starters and studs, and I was like, you know, this championship is mine until it wasn't. Yeah,
and that's the thing is you had. I remember you had. I think you had ATN as well, and you know, you were rolling. And of course, I was still high on Breece Hall. You know, that was a difficult trade for me to make.
Yeah.
And the only reason it worked out for me is because he got injured. You know, I don't like to see it work out for me in that sense. So he was rolling. I was high on him. And I'm still high on him going into this year. I think he's going to be a monster.
And who was that trade again? I know I gave you Derrick Henry and you gave me Breece Hall and a wide receiver.
I gave you Waddle too, and he was a guy that for every draft I did, Waddle was just hanging out there for so long that I was like, I feel like I have to take him, but he was injured.
Yeah, 4th or 5th round.
Yeah, but he was injured, so everyone was staying away from him because they weren't sure what was going on, including me. But then I felt like, well, damn, he's still here. I got to take him, and that happened in a few leagues for me. And I don't like having 5 leagues with the same player. So I did trade him to you reluctantly because he was producing when I traded him to you. And I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I wanted to trade him or Breece, but I wanted Derrick Henry so bad. that I made the trade, and it did not work out for me for a couple weeks. Like I said, the only reason it did is because of that injury. But Waddle and Derrick Henry both just kept eating the rest of the season. But to piggyback
your
on
next one?
to piggyback on those rookie running backs that impressed the hell out of me, Dameon Pierce. I was high on him going into the season, and it turned out to be right. He did get a little slow towards the end of the season, but you got to think about the fact that he was the entire team. He had 220 rushing attempts, almost 1,000 yards rushing. He had 940 rushing yards, 30 catches, 165 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns, averaging 13 points a game for a rookie on a shit team. That's impressive as hell. I mean, he was up and down. There were some weeks I wasn't confident putting him in, and there were a couple leagues where I had him and I traded him. And the thing is, the situation he was in was difficult because you knew they were running the ball. You were worried about, defenses just basically stuffing the run and not having to worry about the pass. And that did happen a few times. But overall, he still put up really solid numbers, better than I expected. And that was definitely a boom for me.
Oh, yeah. And that's funny. I actually left. I didn't have room to put him on my list. I have a couple other guys. I put him up there. But that league that I had Brees Hall, I had him in both leagues. I also had Dameon Pierce in that league as well. I loved him. And you're right.
Yeah.
He fell off the second half of the season. But in the first half, I felt like unstoppable.
Yeah,
absolutely. And the guy that made the list over Dameon Pierce that I had to put on there was another guy, was going around the same, he went a little bit earlier. I think around one round earlier was Travis Etienne. He was a 4th round ADP, right? And last year he had 205 points. He averaged 12 points a game, which is not amazing by any means, but it's still solid, right? Because he was an RB2, RB3. And then he was getting 15 touches a game, so his volume was there. The reason why he wasn't that efficient is because his touchdowns weren't there. Last year, he ended up having only 5 touchdowns. So for a guy that's getting 15 touches a game, he just wasn't getting any goal line work. So Unfortunately, he was making up for that by getting a lot of a good amount of passes.
Absolutely.
And I think obviously he didn't get the passes that he should have because Jaguars ended up going pretty pass heavy in the second half, and they were going a lot to Zay Jones and Evan Ingram, right? And of course your boy Christian Kirk. So I think overall he ended up bouncing back. But for him to go, averaged 84 yards a game and go in the 4th round, he was a guy that I was really big on.
I know. And I remember you were high on him and I was not, and I was wrong. And I remember you offered me, I can't remember what the trade was, but I remember you offered me a trade with him and James Robinson. You offered me a 2-for-1. And I turned it down. And I remember about 3 weeks after I turned it down, I was like, man, you were right. Looking back on that, that one hurt. Because I doubted him and I was wrong. And, it's something that happens with fantasy football to every one of us every season. And that's what makes it fun. But he was not on my radar. I thought he was being overhyped. Turned out he got all the hype he deserved. And I do think this is going to be kind of an interesting season for him because, a lot of people are still down on him thinking that he might not get the goal line work. But I think he's going to have another good year.
Yeah. I mean, if obviously that's for another, we'll dive in deeper later on down the line, but I believe that he, if you grab him, you have to handcuff him, just because, that's the thing is that Doug Peterson, former Philadelphia Eagles coach, of course, he was a big committee guy in Philly, right? And that's how we won our Super Bowl, is Doug Peterson and his committee. And so, and if you watch Travis Etienne, he was like they highlight he was like the 4th least efficient runner in the goal line with like over, I think it was like 10 goal line carries. And it wasn't because he wasn't good. the Jaguars just weren't putting him in a good position. The O-line was trash.
Yeah.
And then the play calling was trash. You're running a goal line with a little running back, and you're not putting a freaking fullback to block for him, and you're not doing twin tight end. You're not doing any jumbo sets, no twin tight end sets. You're not doing any I formations. You're
Right.
just strictly doing a single back set or split back set, and just running him into there, thinking that defense is going to get caught off guard. That's not going to work.
Well,
Not with that O-line.
trust me, I had the same problem with Matt Canada. Watching the way he would run plays, and we're stuck with him again this year. It's the same thing. I had the same emotions as you.
That's funny. That's funny. And then who's your next guy? Who's your second
So-
boom of last year, man?
This is your boy, and this is another one that maybe it's not a boom because maybe it was obvious, but I think he outperformed. Expectations by a lot because there were some people talking shit on Jalen Hurts. Obviously, we all knew he was going to be good, but I don't think anyone knew how good he was going to be. Everyone was saying, he's a mobile quarterback, yeah, but he can't throw the ball. Well, he can throw the ball. He proved that he can throw the ball. He was unbelievable with his legs, but he did great with his arm, and he proved everyone wrong. He had 15 games, 3,700 pass yards, 760 rush yards, and 22 touchdowns, averaging 25.5 fantasy points a game. That's exceeding what everyone expected. They thought he was going to be a good quarterback, not a great quarterback. He started strong.
Not a top three.
Not a top three. And I think he has the potential to be the top quarterback this year. And I know that's a bold statement, not taking anything away from Patrick Mahomes. He is the best. He is the GOAT. But I think there is a chance that Jalen Hurts could finish at number one. If he does, you also got to keep in mind, he played 2 less games than Mahomes. And he started strong. He finished strong. He's got tons of weapons. And I still don't think he's getting the credit he deserves going into this year. But he's going to prove everyone wrong again. The dude's a monster. He's young. He's a freak athlete. He's got a great arm, great legs, and great weapons all around him.
And not to be a biased Eagles fan or anything, but looking at his stats last year, he scored PPR league, of course, 395 points, and Mahomes had 417. So that means that Mahomes outscored him by 22 points, and that's in 2 games. And these guys were both averaging over 20, 24, 25 points per game. Actually, Hurts was averaging around 26, and Mahomes 24.5. So, I mean, he was extremely efficient. And this year, I love him, obviously, not just as an Eagles fan, but if you look at all these people talking about, like, the reason why people are so low on him is because he's a Philadelphia Eagle, man. Eagles get more hate than any freaking team in the league. They don't like us, and we don't care because we get out there and we just take their fucking lunch and we push their face in the dirt and we make them eat the shit that they try to feed us, right? Like, this is your shit sandwich. Eat it, mofo.
Yeah, you guys got some unruly fans. I've been to a couple Eagles games. I wasn't treated very well, but I was enjoying it still.
Yeah, I think if you keep a certain line, but even at those games, man, there's obnoxious people everywhere.
Oh yeah,
right?
It was all good fun, just talking shit. But
yeah,
I got too many friends from Philly that are all about it. They love that environment, and I eat it up too, man. But
oh yeah,
Jalen Hurts is a monster. He's going to perform, in my opinion, just as good or better than he did last year. He's only been in the league a couple years, and he's already putting up ridiculous numbers, and he's very comfortable now.
The biggest Jalen Hurts slander is right now James Jones, a former wide receiver for Green Bay Packers, is talking about Justin Fields is better than Jalen Hurts. And he's like, Jalen Hurts is not that good. And I'm like, how can you sit there and watch this man carry a team to the Super Bowl and put on one of the best performances in Super Bowl history and still lose and say that he's not that great? Like, it's just, and Jalen Hurts eats it up. He comes in and he's like, you know what? We weren't good enough. We'll be better next year. Instead of making up excuses, he eats it up just like he did all his career, and he's just going to keep getting better, man.
Yeah, and
so I agree on that.
Justin Fields is going to be great too. I think he's going to have an awesome season.
Hmm.
But I think Jalen Hurts is going to have a much better season. That's how
Jalen
high
Hurts
I
is
am.
better.
Yeah, he's a better player.
Everybody out there, Jalen Hurts is better. I don't want to hear that crap. Don't come in my chat adding me, dog. I'll come see you in a year. Come on.
Hey, I'm real high on Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields, but we all know who's going first in drafts.
Yeah,
Who's going to be off the
that's true.
board first. We already know that. So who you got
All
as your
right.
your third guy?
Third guy. Okay, so this is the guy that I saw a lot of potential in, and I loved his ADP. In my opinion, he was one of the most undervalued players last year for his draft, and he went later than these guys I listed. And his name is the Ram Stevenson, Ramondre. And if you take away the second half, is RHAM Ram. He's a Ram because he was just running motherfuckers over all day long. He had 249 points last year. He averaged 16.4 touches per game. Obviously 14.6 points because he didn't have a lot of touchdowns, but 85.9 actual yards per game, and that was because he didn't take over the starting job till later on in the
Right,
season.
right,
I think it was around close to mid season when he took over because Damian Harris was injured again.
right.
So that's
And
my
no one
guy.
expected that. He was the RB2. Um, you know,
He was a
even
seventh rounder.
yeah,
ADP was seventh round last year.
even
It's
when
amazing.
even when Damian Harris came back, people were still talking about Ramondre like he was the RB2. But he was
Mm-hmm.
by that point it was pretty clear that he was the top runner. But yeah, I mean he was on a committee for the first half of the season, and then when Harris went down, he took over and was pretty much a bell cow back. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exactly sure what to expect with Zeke this year, but I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue. I don't think Zeke is the same guy. We've seen him put up dismal numbers the last couple years compared to the first couple
Mm-hmm.
years, and I don't think he's going to muscle in on too much of the production from Ramondre. So I'm pretty high on him again this year.
So I'm a little bit worried with the Zeke position because Zeke last year actually had 12 touchdowns. So he was actually one of the leading touchdown leaders last year. Like he
He,
was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's only 12 guys last year that had 10 or more touchdowns. So for him
he
to get
he
that, he
was
was
getting goal
averaging
line carries, and that's the thing that got him
he
all those
Yeah,
touchdowns is just the goal
Zeke,
line.
16.5 touches per game. A lot of people don't realize he was actually like getting a lot. He was only getting 12 points per game, so he wasn't he was an RB3, RB4 by all means. But 16 touches a game, he was wildly inefficient because he was only averaging 61 yards per game. But man, when it came to that goal line, they were feeding him
Yeah,
two times at least in that
right.
goal line trying to get it, and he punched it in. But in that regards, I love Ramondre, and I was super bullish on him before the Zeke signing. So now, I think his floor is still there, but I think his ceiling, they just took the top off of it, and he's no longer, to me, like I would no longer consider my RB1, which I was happy taking him in the third round as my best running back. But now I'm looking at other options, unfortunately, because of that.
I totally understand that. It's actually very valid when you go over what Zeke did last year. Um, but I just feel like Zeke's gas tank is running out. I don't think I think Ramondre is going up and Zeke is going down. And
Mhm.
I'm still pretty high on Ramondre. I think Zeke is going to be more of a change of pace back than a committee. So I'm not
Mhm.
as worried about Ramondre. I'm still really high on him. Now, of course, don't get me wrong. The addition of Zeke does affect his draft position, and I'm not as high on him as I was, but I'm still pretty high on him.
Mhm. I get you. And I hear that. Who's your top boomer last year?
Well, this is another running back that the reason I love him is because I've had him for many years on many different teams, and That's Cordarrelle Patterson. Now, he played really well in 2021, and people were shocked by that. I mean, he's a freak athlete, but, in previous years, even though he was such a stud, he wasn't putting up great numbers. He wasn't performing well. So everyone kind of forgot about him. Then he came out in 2021, and everyone was like, damn, Cordarrelle is, acting like the old Cordarrelle. And then I think in 2022, he still was forgotten. People weren't giving him, they weren't paying any attention to him. And he started off a lot better than he finished, but he started off on fire. He was not nearly as involved in the passing game in 2022 as he was in 2021, but he still scored 11 touchdowns, and he did catch the ball a good bit. And, my main reason of him being a boom is because I feel like he was probably not even drafted in most leagues. Someone you pick up off the waiver wire and, don't even really think about putting him in unless one of your running backs gets injured, which is what happened to me. And then he just started performing. And then all of a sudden everyone's, trying to trade for him because the same thing happened in 2021. He was forgotten. And then all of a sudden he's one of the top running backs in the league and everyone's trying to trade for him. That's the kind of guy I look for in a boom. Someone that's not even on the radar and then comes out week after week and scores touchdowns. And that's what Cordarrelle did. I mean, he did fade off towards the end of the season, but he was on fire for the first half of the season and no one expected it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he definitely he did good. But Tyler Algier kicking in the second half kind of took a lot of those touches too. He was pretty efficient. But an honorable mention that we didn't even touch on today, Josh Jacobs was actually an ADP of 4th round last year, and I didn't get him in any of my leagues because he was going a little bit earlier than I was able to touch, and I didn't feel like I was missing out that much. I was like, I still had ETN and Breece Hall around that 4th round, so I was happy. And of course, Dameon Pierce around the 5th. But Josh Jacobs last year was a 4th rounder. That man was obviously the leading rusher last year. He ended up scoring freaking he had 23 touches per game, 19.2 points per game, 12 touchdowns. So he was really well balanced. And then 328 points. He was actually 3rd highest scorer last year, behind of course Eckler and McCaffrey.
I absolutely agree. I'm actually surprised I didn't even put him on my list because I remember when one of my buddies drafted him and, the whole league starts laughing. Wow, Josh Jacobs that early, man. You could have waited a couple rounds to pick him up. And then, dude's top running back in the league just every week putting up insane numbers, getting insane volume. He was not anywhere on my radar. I wanted nothing to do with him. And he was just crushing it every week. And he's in a weird spot right now, but he'll be fine. He's going to be a monster again this year. And that's a great boom, man. He was a guy that he definitely wasn't forgotten, but was not getting any credit.
No. And I think it's because new regime, Josh McDaniels, people were worried, they were going to run that committee. But, there was obviously nobody even worth it. Like, they were drafted a rookie, Zamir White. Like, he wasn't that great. And then they got Brandon Bolden from the Patriots. Like, those are all like 3rd, 4th stream options,
Absolutely. There was nothing behind him. That's so true. And real quick, I want to make a correction. I accidentally said that Cordarrelle had 11 touchdowns. That was 2021. He only had 8 last year, but still, for a guy that was forgotten, still.
I wasn't going to correct you, but yeah, it was.
I was just glancing down at the numbers. I was like, oh, you read 2021's numbers.
Yeah,
just for the touchdowns.
You're good.
Yeah,
that's right. And now let's talk about draft strategy. So, Joe, for the people out there that are new to this, we would like to know, what is it? You've obviously won several leagues over the years, right? So you know what you're doing. You take a very dedicated approach, as do I. So what is it that you would say as far as like your strategy or advice you would give these guys?
Well, my strategy is probably something that I think most people would agree with. I'm not a fan of the 0 running back strategy. I never have been. I don't even like seeing those videos, that pop up on YouTube, 0 RB strategy. I don't even watch them.
Hot takes.
I always go with a running back first. Now, don't get me wrong. If my pick is, towards the end, eighth or ninth, and I still see someone that's an incredible wide receiver on the board, yeah, I'm going to grab him. But generally speaking, I look for a running back in the first round. And, you know, another thing that I try to keep in mind, and this is during all rounds, is to stay away from players that are injury prone. Um, there's quite a few people that were really high on DeAndre Swift last year. I stayed far away from him because he was injury prone. I knew he was going to be getting injured again. Sure enough, he went down. And then all of a sudden, Jamal Williams comes in and starts just cleaning up, taking every touchdown. Even when DeAndre Swift came back, it was a Jamal Williams show. And, that's it with even with Cordarrelle I was just talking about. He only played 13 games. He got injured. Who knows if he finished the season, he might have had, double-digit touchdowns. There's a lot of people that I really like as running backs that are injury prone, so I stay away from them. And I feel like if you stay away from injury prone players and just keep it real basic as far as filling your roster. So if you go running back, then next round go wide receiver. If you go wide receiver, next round go running back, and try to fill your spots and have a stud at each position. Obviously, that's nearly impossible if you're looking for a tight end and the first three are gone. But generally speaking, you want a stud at every position. And I think that's doable with the depth we have at wide receiver, running back, and quarterback this year. You can get a stud, and then you can have someone that you're at least confident in for your RB2, your wide receiver 2, and your flex. But I think you definitely want to have a stud at every position, which is why I try to stagger it with each round.
All right. That was actually the wrong answer. The right answer is watch the Fantasy Football Sports Minds podcast and do whatever they tell you to draft. That's
right.
The right answer, Joe. No, I'm just kidding. That's good advice. Good advice. I agree with you. Stay the hell away from those injury prone guys. They're gonna screw up your whole league.
You don't want to be stressed
on early round guys.
It's really uncomfortable when I said stay away from DeAndre Swift, but I did somehow end up having him on. I got him in one league somehow. I think he was just hanging around way too long, and I figured I should take him. But I traded him right before he got injured, and thank God, because when you have these guys that everyone's like, yeah, they're great players, and then they talk about their injuries, that's a huge red flag. David Montgomery's another one where he is a monster when he gets the ball, but it's hard to trust him every week because you're worried about his injuries. There's too many players like that at wide receiver and running back that, when you see a wide receiver getting up in age, when you see a running back getting up in age, that's another thing you got to keep in mind is they might be a little bit more prone to injury. They might lose a step, and just in a year, you can see them lose a step, and it'll make a huge difference when you're talking about people playing at the NFL level.
Yeah. And so for me personally, my strategy has evolved over the years. I was, who wasn't a full running back type of guy, 5 years ago, right? Or later, or earlier, where you're just grabbing 3 running backs in the first 5 rounds, right? Like that was the approach before, when the game was different, before you had all these committees, right? Committees were few and far between back then. You had workhorses. That was it. So
True.
my strategy has evolved. And I even tried the last few years to try to go heavy wide receiver. And, that worked somewhat. It didn't work. I mean, I'm really good at identifying talent later on for running backs in different positions. But I guess my biggest advice for that would be, you go with, best available, right? And that sounds pretty generic and vanilla when people say best available.
Yeah.
But when you look at it, best available in a different way, you're not talking about what ESPN says is the best available, or what all these other biased reporters are saying are the best available, because most of the time that stuff's smoke and mirrors. The best available is you do your own research and you find out which guys are the most efficient, And that's why we're different from all these other podcasts, because we're highlighting on certain things that people don't necessarily look at, like touches per game, and efficiency for points per game, right? And of course, average draft position. Because if you got a guy that's, people are forgetting about, like for example, your boy James Conner, somebody that he's not going into the fourth or fifth round, but when you look at his efficiency, he's getting 16 touches a game and averaging, 15 points per game, and he's going in the fifth or sixth round. That's extremely great value. So
Right.
you want to get guys that are giving you more ceiling than they're being given credit for. And so that's why I think it's all about adapting and changing your style, because when you go to a draft with one strategy, you're going to screw yourself. You can't focus on one player. You got to
Right.
have 3 to 4 players you like per round, and you have to do enough mock drafts to know what players are going to be around that round so you can build your team accordingly.
Absolutely. And it definitely depends on your roster too. So, you're saying take best available, and I'm saying absolutely think about best available, not just for your research, but for your roster. If you're in a league that has 3 wide receiver spots, then maybe you should take a wide receiver in the first round instead of a running back. I just prefer the running back position because, that position is more scarce than, all the volume you see at wide receiver. But, if you need 3 wide receivers on your roster, then you should probably look for a wide receiver the first round. So a lot of it depends on how your roster's set up, but you got to do your research, fill your roster, spread out the studs as wide receivers and running backs, and if you can, quarterback. And then, with tight end, that's something that's gonna probably be a roll of the dice. But you can do your research and find out who's looking better. And also, I'm a little more confident in some of the rookie tight ends that we've got coming up this season.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good ones, but for me, for like I was saying before, for a position that you're only getting 10 to 12 points a game, and you have to grab, for example, a tight end that's averaging about 12 to 14, because the second best tight end was Andrews. He was averaging 15 or 16 a game until he started dropping down. But if you look at the tight end position, for me personally, for example, looking at let's say George Kittle, right? Evan Ingram, guys that were pretty successful. George Kittle averaged 13.3 points per game. Evan Ingram, 10.3 points per game. And these guys are going in the 6th and 7th round. When I can
Right.
have a wide receiver that got me, can get me 13 to 15, that's an extra 3 to 5 points per game. So to me,
Oh
the
yeah.
ADP doesn't match the value. So as far as that's concerned, what I like to do later rounds, which not everybody's a fan of, is I like to do my handcuffs. So I have certain players that I graded, and you folks can see our sheets. We're going to put up our draft sheets here so you kind of get an idea. But there's each of our own draft sheets. But there's players that I mark as, volatile or like handcuffs, because you can't grab one without grabbing the other. And if you're in a situation where you didn't get high quality running backs early and you're scrambling for running backs, you have to change your approach to be like, I would love to pick up this receiver this round, but now I have to pick up this guy, his handcuff back to back, because number one, I don't know who's going to be the workhorse, or number two, I don't know if this guy is going to be healthy. So if
And
that's the case, you take 100% of the backfield versus risking 50 to 0% of the backfield, and that to me just makes more sense.
yeah, and I do agree with the approach to taking a handcuff, but me personally, I try to stay away from being in that situation altogether. So I will try to find a team where you've got one workhorse running back and not much depth behind him, because I would rather have another solid player on my bench that I can use than kind of a handcuff just waiting around. With that said, I'm not saying that's the best strategy. That's just my strategy. I would prefer
What's work
to,
for you?
yeah, I would prefer to have a really rock solid running back and then a good wide receiver than a good running back and another pretty good running back as his handcuff. I just would rather have that bench spot for another player that I feel like I could actually utilize during the season rather than him just kind of sitting there in case.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we appreciate you guys. Thank you for joining us here, Fantasy Football Sports Minds. You all have a great night. We'll see you here next time. All right.
Peace.
Take care, guys. All right.